The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Yes, and good morning, and welcome to the webinar, Managing the Roundup Ready Xtend Crop System in 2017. Yes, good morning. My name is Dan Davidson. I work with Illinois Soybean Association and want to thank you for attending this webinar being sponsored by Monsanto. Our presenters today are Chris Kamienski and Lance Tarochione. Chris is product development rep for Monsanto. It is undergraduate and master's degree at the University of Illinois. He has been working with product development in Illinois and more recently has worked with the Xtend product line and getting it ready for release and commercialization this year. Also joining on the call today is Lance Tarochione. He's a technical agronomist from Monsanto in Western Illinois. He also farms, and he also is a past soy envoy for the Soy Advisor. So we want to thank the two presenters today for taking the time to come online and do this presentation. Just a few logistics about this morning. If you are a CCA and you signed up and included your CCA number, and you attend today's webinar, that will be submitted to the CCA program for 1 CEU in pest management. If you're listening to a recording of this webinar online, it'll be posted on a YouTube channel. You can go into your CCA account online and you can apply, self-apply for 1 CEU for this webinar. So during the course of the presentation, we'll kick off shortly. Will be about 45 minutes, and as soon as during that presentation, take some time to ask some questions. You can look on your dashboard to your right, and you can post a question, and we'll collect any questions, and we'll ask them at the end of the webinar. We like to save about 10 or 11 minutes for questions for Q&A. So without further ado, I want to thank Monsanto for sponsoring this webinar, and for Chris Kamienski and Lance Tarochione for presenting the webinar and having a discussion today. And Chris, we're going to turn it over to you now.
All righty, thank you, Dan. Appreciate the opportunity to address group today, and look forward to discussing how we can manage the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system in 2017 and how we can do that successfully in Illinois. Just a few things about the introduction. I think it's important to note that this webinar was created to reinforce the importance of proper application and weed resistance management practices with applicators, retailers, and growers who are utilizing the Xtend crop system. So that's really our goal here today. Just as an overview, the Xtend crop system is designed as an advanced weed management system in the fight against herbicide-resistant weeds and tough-to-control weeds in soybeans. The system can help maximize weed control as well as the yield potential of our Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans. And as you can note in this slide, if you read through it, you'll see that there are some verbiage and comments about cotton, although we won't be talking about that today, obviously, with the focus on Illinois. Just be aware that this trait and this herbicide system is also available in cotton for our producers in the southern U.S. From a broad perspective, really the Xtend system is part of the Roundup Ready Plus crop management solutions, and that includes weed management recommendations and cashback incentives to farmers that utilize the endorsed herbicides. The cashback incentives are designed to ensure that a diversified program is used that includes traditional residual herbicides and multiple modes of action. So ultimately, we want each farmer to have the best tools available to maintain clean fields throughout the season. So we don't look at the Xtend crop system as replacing some of the fundamental principles that we've adopted as producers, and that means starting clean, staying clean, using multiple modes of action, and layered residuals in many cases. So this doesn't replace those principles, it only adds to them. The system does include a new enhanced dicamba chemistry option that will be used in conjunction with the seed trait technology in the Xtend soybeans. For the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to focus primarily on the XtendiMax herbicide. Also mentioned there is the Roundup Xtend product, which is pending regulatory approval. The Roundup Xtend product is a premix of glyphosate and dicamba, which we hope to have approved in the near future. But for purpose of today, we're going to focus on the XtendiMax product. And you can see when you combine the seed with the chemistry, that's where we get that system that we'd like to refer to as the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system. XtendiMax itself is a low volatility formulation of dicamba. Through years of lab and field testing, it has proven to provide an additional option for management of glyphosate resistant and tough to control broadleaf weeds. So we're very excited and optimistic and happy to have this product available to us. I think it's going to be a valuable tool as we move forward in combating some of these tough to control weeds. Just a few facts about the Xtend system. They are built on the proven high yield potential of Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield technology that many growers are familiar with. Xtend soybeans are tolerant to both glyphosate and dicamba. It's important to understand that the auxin tolerance in Roundup Ready to Xtend soybeans is specific to dicamba, so applications of 2,4-D or other auxins group 4 herbicides are not labeled and will result in serious crop damage and yield loss. And I talked earlier about the recommendations and incentives that are a part of this program as well. XtendiMax herbicide, it is a dicamba formulation, as I mentioned, for those tough weeds and glyphosate resistant broadleaf weeds. That's the strength of dicamba, obviously, is with the broadleaf weeds. And that would include palmer amaranth, water hemp, mare's tail, which in Illinois are probably the top 3 troublesome weeds that you're going to encounter. But it also is going to help provide control of other tough broadleaf weeds such as lamb's quarters, morning glory, and velvet leaf. XtendiMax herbicide does also offer up to 14 days soil residual activity on certain small-seeded broadleaf weeds. That would be small-seeded broadleaf weeds such as water hemp and palmer amaranth. The key component or factor in the residual control that we see with XtendiMax is water solubility. Dicamba has a very high water solubility, and as a result, we see the length of control vary based on the soil moisture. So the drier the conditions are, we tend to see an extended amount of control or a longer length of control under drier conditions because of the high water solubility of dicamba. Just to go into some of the features of XtendiMax, it is designed to be the lowest volatility dicamba formulation, and this is achieved through our proprietary vapor grip technology. If you look at the slide, what you can see is that when comparing the relative volatility of dicamba salts, Clarity is a significant improvement over the DMA salts. The DMA salts that you may be familiar with would be products such as Banville. And then going further to the right on the slide, you'll see that XtendiMax with the vapor grip further reduces the volatility potential when compared to Clarity. So we're seeing upwards of a 90% reduction in volatility potential when we compare it to Clarity. It's important to note too that the more volatile dicamba formulations such as the DMAs, the Banville product that we mentioned previously, will not be approved for use in the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system, nor will the Clarity product at this time. Only the approved products that are labeled at this moment are XtendiMax and Ingenia. So how does vapor grip work? Just a short discussion here about herbicide volatility. Volatility does occur after application, and it's influenced by the types of the salt used, the herbicide formulation, tank mix additives, temperature, and use rate. Monsanto's vapor grip technology, along with the low volatility salt of dicamba, are working together to reduce the potential for off-target movement of dicamba through volatility after spraying. a little bit more detail on how that works is in the spray tank there's potential for dicamba acid to form in solution. And once the acid forms, it can volatilize from the leaf or soil surface after spraying. And so what the Vapor Grip technology does is it prevents the formation of dicamba acid in the tank. Another way to look at it is that Vapor Grip effectively blocks the hydrogen ions from combining with dicamba ions to form that acid. The result is less acid in the spray solution, thus reducing the potential for volatilization. Vapor Grip technology is not a standalone additive, but rather a part of the XtendiMax herbicide formulation. So this is something that's already in the jug, not something that is added separately. So we're going to move on and talk more specifically about the application requirements for XtendiMax herbicide in the Xtend crop system. We're going to look at an overview of what is off-target movement, some of the chemistry factors and properties, the windows of application, preparing for the sprayer, preparing to spray, mixing and handling, and some important factors during spraying and after spraying. So let's first discuss the off-target movement. There are three main types of off-target pesticide movement. The first is physical drift. Physical drift occurs during application, so it's the movement of the relatively small spray droplets, what we call the driftable fines, through the air at the time of application that go to a site other than the intended target. The most important way or effective way to minimize physical drift while also maximizing the product performance is to follow the application requirements for product use. And so we have some of those application requirements spelled out pretty well with the XtendiMax product. The second method that we can get off-target movement is sprayer contamination. This can be a common source of pesticide movement. Contamination can occur from residues that are left in the spray tank, the boom, or other spray components. So if equipment is not thoroughly rinsed, any herbicide remaining in parts of the sprayer have the potential to be distributed throughout the entire spray solution and cause subsequent damage to susceptible crops. One of the things I like to emphasize when I'm talking with folks about this system and the importance of sprayer contamination is to also consider contamination of other equipment or any other items that come in contact with dicamba. So your tender trucks and things like that are also subject to subject to contamination, and subsequently need to be aware of that and handled appropriately when we talk about triple rinse procedures. Finally, volatility is the least frequent cause of off-target movement of dicamba. The volatility occurs after the spray application, as I mentioned previously. It's a result of the molecules vaporizing from the surface and then getting into the air and then moving by the wind to the non-target areas. So the best way to address volatility is applying a low volatility formulation and using the product according to label directions. When we look at the chemistry properties of XtendiMax, the active ingredient is dicamba. It is a DGA salt with a 2.9 pound per gallon loading. It's a straight goods product, so it's just dicamba. Has a pre-emergence use rate of 22 to 44 ounces per acre, and that's going to deliver 1/2 pound to 1 pound of dicamba acid per acre. For post-emergence applications, the rate is 22 fluid ounces per acre. It's important to note that the 22 ounces per acre is the minimum and maximum in-crop use rate, and that's a rate chosen to reduce the selection pressure for resistant weeds and also provide very efficacious weed control. So unlike other herbicides in the past where you might have seen a rate range based on weed size, we just have one rate with this product when used post-emergence. You can also see that 88 ounces is the total for the year and that the signal word for the herbicide is a caution. There are some certain supplemental label restrictions that we want to pay attention to. Restrictions include do not apply this product aerially, and do not make applications of the product within 24 hours advance of a rainfall. So what we're saying is that before making any application of XtendiMax, it's advisable to consult with weather forecast to determine if rainfall is expected. And with other herbicides, if rainfall within 24 hours is expected, that does increase the potential for herbicide runoff, something that we want to avoid. When we look at the use pattern and window of application with XtendiMax and Xtend soybeans, you can see that applications can be made from pre-emergence through the vegetative growth stages up to the R1 growth stage. You can make one pre-emergence application and two post-emergence applications. So we do feel that we have a very wide window of application and gives our producers a lot of flexibility to use this product in different situations, whether it's in a burn down at planting or post-emergence scenario. Of note, with this herbicide, there is no plant back restrictions, so applications can be made and planting can commence without any restrictions or waiting period between application and planting. So that's going to be valuable in times where we have wet springs and delayed applications of burn down and delayed planting. This is something that could prove to be very valuable in this system as we move forward. Talking a little bit
Chris,
more. Yes.
Chris, would you care to clarify a little bit on the there might be a little bit of confusion around the 24-hour rainfall language and how that relates or does not relate to rain fastness?
Yeah, so the rainfall restriction on the application in the 24-hour time period is in an effort to reduce the product from running off and physically moving from the site of application. The actual rain fastness of the product is 4 hours. So that would mean 4 hours on an application that lands on a leaf surface. That product will stay where it's at and not run off the plant that it's applied to. But we want to avoid the applications before a heavy rain where we think we're going to get physical movement of the surface water or surface soil that can contain the dicamba, and that's very consistent with other herbicides as well. Just moving forward here and talking a little bit about preparing the sprayer and some other application requirements. At this time, the Turbo T-Jet air induction, or TTI 11004, is the only nozzle approved for applications of XtendiMax. Spray pressure with this nozzle must not exceed 63 psi. We do anticipate that other nozzles will be approved. That's a testing program that's currently underway to evaluate and confirm that other nozzles are effective. As additional nozzles are tested and approved, they will be listed at a website. The website listed, you can see on your screen, is www.extendamaxapplicationrequirements.com. So this is going to be a valuable website. So our recommendation is that before making any application, confirm that the nozzle you intend to use is listed on the website, and that website will be updated regularly as more nozzles are added and more nozzles are approved for use with this system. But at this time, the TTI 11004 is the only one approved. When we're talking about weed control and talking about getting the most effectiveness out of this product, scouting is one of the most important things we can do prior to an application. We recommend scout fields before application to ensure that the herbicides and the rates will be appropriate for the weeds and the weed species and the weed size that are present. Target small weeds. For the best performance of this product and for many products in general, control weeds when they are early less than 4 inches tall is going to give you the best results and give you the most success with this program. A few other crop-specific application requirements. The combined total application rate from crop emergence up to the R1 stage is 44 ounces, so that would be 2 applications of 22 ounces can be made during that post-emergence window. Allow at least 7 days between the application, and allow at least 7 days between the final application and harvest or feeding of soybean forage, and also allow at least 14 days between the final application and the harvest of feeding of soybean hay. Continue talking about how we're going to prepare to spray. It's important to scout your fields for weeds, but it's also important to scout your fields for sensitive areas. So an applicator must utilize a downwind buffer to protect sensitive areas, and downwind buffers provide a way to minimize the potential drift of off-target movement of dicamba into sensitive areas. So what we're on the label is to maintain a 110-foot buffer when applying 22 ounces of the product, or a 220-foot buffer when applying more than 22 ounces of the product between the last treated row and the closest downwind edge in the direction that the wind is spraying. A downwind buffer must be maintained between the last treated row and the closest downwind edge of that sensitive area, and that no application can be initiated in or into an area that is within the applicable buffer distance. So the sensitive areas that we're referring to would be areas that could potentially harbor threatened and endangered species. So we want to make sure that we're doing due diligence in protecting those areas and maintaining a buffer distance when spraying when the wind is blowing towards those areas. When determining the buffer distance, there are some exceptions that can be included in the buffer distance calculations. One of those would be roads or paved or graveled surfaces, also planted agricultural fields containing corn, other dicamba-tolerant soybeans, sorghum, millet, small grains, is what you're going to find here in Illinois. Another area that can be considered as part of that buffer is agricultural fields that have been prepared for planting. So if you're in a burn down situation and you're using this product and the fields that are adjacent to you do not have a crop planted, then they can count towards your buffer distance if there's no crop planted and the field has been prepared for planting. Also covered in that is areas that are covered by the footprint of a building, a silo, or any other man-made structure. Here's just an example. These diagrams are simplified illustrations on how a downwind buffer is maintained between the application area and the adjacent downwind area. So it's important to point out that 110 feet for the 22 ounces and 220 for anything greater than 22, and that again is when the wind is blowing towards that sensitive area. It's also crucial to know what non-target susceptible crops and other plantings may be adjacent to your field. So a couple of requirements that we'll see on the label is do not apply under circumstances where off-target movement may occur to food, forage, or other plantings that may be damaged. Also, do not apply when the wind is blowing towards adjacent dicamba-sensitive crops. This would include, but not limited to, tomatoes, cucurbits, or grapes. Also, we do not want to allow contact of the herbicide with foliage, green stems, non-woody roots of crops, and desirable plants, and there's some listed there. So we do know dicamba. It's a broadleaf herbicide, but it's also going to have activity on broadleaf crops as well. So we're going to do what we can to limit the amount of exposure that this herbicide has on the susceptible crops. So our label states that we do not apply when the wind is blowing towards those sensitive crops.
Chris, would you comment a little bit on, I think it's fair to say this label has probably received more scrutiny than any other new product maybe that's ever come out. And when you read labels very closely, you find language in it that maybe you didn't realize was there. I think there's a lot of assumptions made that this language exists in this label because of the properties of dicamba. And I guess I'd like you to comment a little bit on how it has more to do with, current, focus and changes within regulatory agencies, and this language exists in a lot of product labels, even products that aren't known for having the potential for volatility, and how this language exists in a lot of labels. And when you read any label closely, as you should, you might be surprised to see this sort of language in a lot of products that you currently use, and it's not necessarily in there, just because of the properties of dicamba.
Yeah, that's correct, Lance. And what you'll find is that there's statements on nearly every herbicide label about avoiding off-target movement to non-target crops. And it's really no different with dicamba. We're emphasizing it. We're training on it. There is increased scrutiny just as the regulatory climate has changed about this product, but that doesn't take away from the fact that no matter what product you're using, that you don't want it to go where it's not supposed to go. And that's just a fundamental principle of weed control. One, you're losing the product from being able to control weeds, but then also you have the potential to damage the neighboring products. So really, this is just a sort of a reinforcement effort to educate as much as we can, make people aware of what's important, and how to avoid things happening that you don't want to happen. There's other herbicides, as you mentioned, with similar restrictions, whether it's from the rainfall standpoint or from the buffer standpoint, or the restriction on applying towards sensitive crops. As an industry, we've done a fantastic job of managing herbicide applications throughout the years with these restrictions in place on other herbicides. And so I don't see this as being any different. I think it's important for each individual grower to understand their operation. They understand their farm, their layout, and they know their farm better than anybody else. And so they know what they can do and what they can't do through the years of experience. And so that's really what, if you want to talk about kind of the overarching goal that we have today, is to educate you as growers, and so that you can take that information and apply it to your farm and get the most use out of this product, and use it properly and have the most success with it. Just moving on, just to continue the discussion about the application process and other things to consider before spraying. Wind speed and direction is something that's going to be very important. You should always assess the weather conditions at the field prior to the application and during the application. Drift potential is the lowest between wind speeds of 3 to 10 miles per hour. Wind speeds less than 3 miles an hour can be an indicator of temperature inversions, and we'll talk a little bit more about inversions in the upcoming slides. But also note that wind speeds that do not register over 3 miles an hour may also be erratic and prone to change direction. So perfectly calm conditions can be deceiving, and we can see either the presence of an inversion or at the very least a unpredictable wind direction. And so we want to avoid those applications in wind speeds less than 3 miles an hour. A couple other things, as mentioned previously: do not apply if the wind is blowing towards an adjacent susceptible crop, and do not apply if the wind speeds are greater than 15 miles per hour. I think if you look at the landscape of Illinois, one of the things that's going to be our biggest ally in this application process is corn. I know this is an Illinois soy webinar, but corn is going to be an important ally for us, because corn is not a susceptible crop. And so corn gives us the ability to make those applications adjacent to dicamba is adjacent to corn, and we can actually go into that 10 to 15 mile per hour wind speed if the wind is blowing towards a non-target crop such as corn. So the other non-target crops or non-target crop that's going to be an ally of ours would be other dicamba tolerant soybeans. So if we know that we have dicamba tolerant soybeans downwind when we're making an application, that gives us a lot of flexibility in our application window as far as the environmental conditions, and allows us to go to some higher wind speeds. But overall, please do remember that anything greater than 15 miles per hour do not apply regardless. Just to follow up on the inversions, we really want to avoid applications that can happen during an inversion because drift potential can be very high. During an inversion, the atmosphere is actually very stable and there's little vertical air mixing. And this can cause small suspended droplets to remain in a concentrated cloud. This cloud can move in unpredictable directions, and because there's not much wind, that cloud can move very slowly and over great distances. Temperature inversions are characterized by increasing temperatures with altitude. They're most common on evenings and nights where there's limited cloud cover, so a clear night with little to no wind. And basically what happens is there's cooling of the air at the Earth's surface, and it's trapped below the warmer air, and an inversion begins to form as the sun sets, and often this inversion can continue into the morning. So if we're under these conditions, it's something we really want to be aware of and avoid applications during that time period. The inversions often dissipate with increased wind speed, so if you were to encounter inversion conditions and the wind began to blow above 3 miles per hour after the sunrise, those inversion conditions have disappeared. Or if you begin to see the warm up, generally a 3-degree increase in the temperature from the morning low would indicate that the inversion conditions have ceased. So again, we want to be very aware that inversions can happen. They happen generally in the evening, can last into the morning, and they happen under clear conditions and little to no wind. Once the wind picks up and the temperature increases, those inversion conditions disappear. Moving on to the mixing and handling of XtendiMax, it may only be tank mixed with products that have been tested and found to not adversely affect the off-site movement potential. So at this time, no products can be tank mixed with XtendiMax. Products are currently being tested and evaluated, and once those products are approved, they will also be on that website that was mentioned earlier, XtendiMaxApplicationRequirements.com, and we do hope and anticipate that we will have additional products that will be available as tank mixtures available to your producers for the 2017 growing season. That information will be communicated as it comes out, but you can also check the XtendiMax Application Requirements website periodically to see if additional products have been added. So just to reiterate, at this time, do not tank mix any products with XtendiMax unless you hear from somebody or are able to confirm that by logging on to the website. It's recommended that because this is something that will be updated frequently, that website be checked 7 days before making an application of XtendiMax. And just as a note, the tank mix requirements and restrictions that are in place now, that applies to all applications of XtendiMax, whether it's a pre-plant, pre-emerge, or post-emerge application. A couple other points to emphasize with mixing and handling. Do not tank mix this product with ammonium salts, such as ammonium sulfate or urea ammonium nitrate, 28% or 32%. AMS and other additives that acidify the spray solution can significantly increase the risk of dicamba volatility. So that's something that we certainly want to avoid. The good news is we're working with a number of water conditioning manufacturers, distributors on developing products that do the job of ammonium sulfate in the terms of conditioning water. However, the products that are being developed do not contain ammonia or other acidifying additives, and so there'll be specific products that we'll see that are designed for the XtendiMax and the Xtend system that do the job of water conditioning without elevating the risk of volatility. And the same is true for products like drift reduction agents. They can minimize the percentage of driftable fines. However, we've got to make sure that they don't adversely affect the spray solution, and so they have to be tested thoroughly. And once they're tested, they will be added to the website of approved products. Also note that some crop oil concentrates or high surfactant oil concentrates, MSOs, can cause a temporary crop response as well.
I think this would be a good time to call out, Chris, that you know, when you showed the volatility reduction from XtendiMax of 90% over Clarity, some people looking at that might have questioned whether Clarity was actually less volatile than Banville based on their past experience, and I think your comments about about nitrogen containing adjuvants such as AMS, you know, increasing the volatility of dicamba formulations, you know, probably has influenced the level of volatility that people may have seen from a product such as Clarity over the years. And I don't know if you want to comment any on that or not, but the things that we've learned about AMS and the impact that it has on volatility and how that, you know, probably has impacted other formulations that perhaps did have lower volatility, but you weren't really able to see that because of the tank mixing that was occurring.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Lance. Good, and that's a good point to make, is that if you were to take a dicamba product today and add ammonium sulfate, what you're doing is adding a significant amount of hydrogen ions to the solution, and those hydrogen ions are going to make that solution, turn that dicamba into an acid, and subsequently give it a very high volatility profile. So Clarity applications very frequently were recommended with ammonium sulfate or a 28 or 32% solution, and subsequently what we were doing was creating a very volatile product. So the benefits of Clarity may not have been achieved because of the additives that we were adding to the spray solution that were increasing the acidity and causing the product to become very volatile. And that's where not only by restricting the use of AMS, but also using XtendiMax with the vapor grip technology, we can address that very effectively and keep the volatility to a minimum. Just continuing some of the discussion here along the lines of spraying. The minimum carrier volume is 10 gallons to the acre. However, I would consider higher spray volumes in that 15 gallon per acre range if dense weed infestations do exist. We talked about the spray tips that we're using. They do produce very large droplets, and you know, my personal feelings on that is if you do have the larger droplets, you're going to have fewer of them. And so I generally recommend for most applications to be above that 10 GPA range in order to get thorough coverage. Also, do not exceed 15 mile per hour ground speed with your sprayer. Slower speeds generally result in better spray coverage and deposition on the target. Faster speeds tend to increase drift potential by decreasing the boom stability and increasing the air turbulence. We often see those two related when it comes to boom height as well. Our recommendation is to operate your sprayer to maintain a consistent boom height no higher than 24 inches above your target, and that's very consistent with the spray tip manufacturer's recommendation for a 110 degree angled spray tip. You generally want to be close to your nozzle spacing. So if you're on 15 or 20-inch centers, that's the same height that you want to be above your target to get maximum overlap and maximum coverage. So just as a general rule, slow down, keep that boom down, and we'll have better deposition and less off-target movement. Finally, we talked about tank contamination or sprayer contamination, and the way that we address that is looking at the effectiveness of a triple rinse as a clean out of the spray equipment. It is something that is required. Minute quantities of dicamba can cause injury to non-dicamba tolerant soybeans or other sensitive crops. So proper spray cleaning is going to be vital to avoid the off-target movement. Thoroughly cleaning the spray equipment after dicamba is recommended, and there's label instructions that are fairly thorough and detailed on how to do that process. So I would encourage referencing the label on how that is done. Sometimes there's a discussion on which spray solution may be the best. What I would encourage you to do is to discuss that with your supplier of either pesticides or whoever may supply you with tank cleaning solutions. They all tend to work very well as long as the process of triple rinse is followed. Now, triple rinse is fairly lengthy, and times and resources need to be devoted to do it correctly. But when it is done correctly, it is effective. And so just have that confidence that if you do take the time, and as you should, to do a thorough tank clean out and do the triple rinse procedure, you can effectively remove dicamba and avoid that tank contamination and problems that may arise from that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's important also to not only focus on the actual sprayer, but other tender equipment that may have come in contact with dicamba as well.
We've seen that pretty clear in all the demonstrations we've done in the past several years at training sites, Chris, that your choice of product to clean out the tank is not going to enable you to skip steps. And if you do the steps appropriately, then what product you're using doesn't tend to make as much difference. So there really isn't any magic clean out material that's going to enable you to skip steps. And if you take the time to do the steps, it's going to be a very effective procedure, regardless of what you're using. And that's what we've seen pretty consistently in those demonstrations, that if you try to do one or two rinses, you're going to see some crop response. If you do that triple rinse procedure, you'll be good.
Yeah, absolutely. The process is more important than the actual product when it comes to triple rinse. So that's really where you want to focus on. There are some very good tank cleaner solutions out there, don't get me wrong, and I encourage you to have that conversation with your supplier and find the one that they've had good success with and that the manufacturer has had good success with in cleaning out dicamba and other products. So once the applications are done, and with regards to managing weed resistance, which is going to be a very important topic, just note that there are some naturally occurring weed biotypes that are tolerant or resistant to dicamba that could exist just due to the natural genetic variability we may see in a weed population. So it's important that we identify and managing those biotypes before they spread, and that's going to be the best method of slowing the development of resistant weeds in your fields or your area. So it's critically important to scout fields after application to detect any weed escapes or shifts in weed species. We do ask that you immediately report any incidents of non-performance of this product to a Monsanto retailer or representative, or simply call a telephone number, and that number is listed there, 1-844-RR-XTEND. And that will enable the process for Monsanto to investigate any weed species that are either suspected of not being controlled or suspected of being resistant. Finally, if resistance is suspected, you're going to want to treat that weed and that weed escape with a herbicide other than a group 4 herbicide, so other than a dicamba product, and it may even entail non-chemical methods to remove any escapes as practical, with the goal of all this is preventing the further seed production from occurring. So if you make the application, scout afterwards, make sure and confirm that you got a good kill. If you don't, contact your retailer or a Monsanto representative or call the 1844 number. Just a couple other resources that are made available to you and some things to consider. When you do have dicamba-tolerant soybeans near non-dicamba-tolerant crops, it is helpful to mark the technology in the field, either using a map or a flag within the field as recommended by the Flag the Technology program. So what we do recommend is that marking Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybean fields with a black and white checkered flag will confirm that your field is planted with a dicamba-tolerant crop, both to the applicator as well as the neighbor. And this is not mandatory, but growers will find this a good practice to avoid the misapplication of herbicides. Other resources that are available to utilize to help identify sensitive areas or susceptible plants or crops near your fields by consulting the sensitive crop registries such as fieldwatch.com, in addition to talking to your neighbors and confirming what is planted near your fields. We also support the Take Action on Weeds initiative, just to follow up on the scouting after application to make sure we are getting good weed control and preventing the development of resistant weeds or the spread of resistant weeds. The website takeactiononweeds.com does contain a lot of strategies, proactive strategies to help manage herbicide resistance that incorporates a diverse set of controls. So something also to resource as a means of slowing and stopping the spread of resistant weeds. So as we get towards the end here, I'll just kind of wrap it up with some of the summary of the application requirements. And these are all designed to help maximize weed control as well as minimize the off-target movement of the product. Number one is use only products labeled for Xtend soybeans. And at this time, XtendiMax with Vapor Grip is one of those products. Make herbicide applications to small weeds less than 4 inches. Do not add ammonium sulfate or other ammonium salts to the spray tank. Apply when wind speeds are between 3 to 10 miles per hour. For in-crop applications, the use rate is 22 ounces of XtendiMax per acre, and also employ a 110-foot downwind buffer to protect the sensitive areas. Use minimum spray volume of 10 gallons to the acre, and do not spray if non-target dicamba susceptible crops are downwind of the field that you're making the application to. Use only the approved nozzles and tank mix partners. Check the website, XtendiMax application requirements within 7 days of the planned applications for any updates on nozzles and tank mix partners. Keep your ground speed under 15 miles an hour. Use the lowest boom height, no higher than 24 inches above your target. And triple rinse your spray equipment after making an application of XtendiMax to avoid spray tank contamination. And also scout your fields after application and report any incidents of non-performance to a Monsanto representative or a retailer, or to the toll-free number 1844-RR-XTEND. With that, we're wrapping up towards the end here. I just want to emphasize that this is a presentation here to educate you and give you the most up-to-date information. This is not a substitute for the product labeling, so I'd encourage everybody to obtain a label, whether that's logging on to a website or having the discussion with your supplier or retailer. and reading the label and understanding it, and taking that information and figuring out how it's going to be helpful and how you're going to use it on your farm and get the most success out of this system. With that, Dan, I'll stop the presentation and open it up.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and thanks for your comments, Lance. Well, you covered a lot of ground and a lot of questions that were kind of being formulated and being submitted sort of in advance of your presentation. You covered them. A lot of these things, a lot of questions about the practicality of using this. You covered much of this. A few questions. What's the re-entry interval for XtendiMax?
Excellent question. I don't have that on the top of my head, and I was going to print out the label here in front of me and have it available. It's not anything unusual. It's very consistent with other herbicides. We can get that information to you. If not, again, log on and CDMS and other websites that have this label. Just remember that this is the supplemental label, and that information will be there.
We're going to publish a few highlights, and I'll go look at the supplemental label, and we'll put this in the highlights that will get posted after this webinar.
Excellent.
How does XtendiMax compare to Ergenia? Comparable?
Yeah, I think what you're going to find is they're both dicamba. So when we talk about weed control, dicamba is what killed the weeds, so you're going to see very comparable in that sense. The differences that we'll find with Ingenia is one is going to be the use rate. Their products are a different loading. They're also a different salt. The difference that XtendiMax has the vapor grip technology with it, which Ingenia does not have. And so those are some of the differences you'll see in how the products may differ in terms of their characteristics relative to volatility. But in terms of weed control, dicamba is dicamba.
Okay. So can you comment on why Arkansas did approve this herbicide but didn't approve Eugenia? Was it a matter of timing of regulatory approval, federal regulatory approval? It's a question that was sent in, right? And you might not know.
Yeah. Lance, do you want to touch on that one?
We asked yesterday, just in case that came up, and I don't know that we have, an official response on that. It's certainly curious that, that the product that was labeled first, that has the lowest volatility, isn't the one that they chose to approve. So I think we're still seeking clarification on that, and hoping that as time progresses, that things will change. That's a pretty fluid situation. Doesn't necessarily impact an Illinois grower, but I understand there's lots of curiosity around what's going on in Arkansas, and obviously that's a pretty touchy situation, and lots of ongoing conversations, and I don't really have any explanation for why one dicamba formulation was chosen over another for that state approval, and what additional state restrictions may or may not be placed on any dicamba formulation, in certain states. Most states are, following the path that Illinois is on, and that's a fairly typical state approval. You get your federal label first, and then the state approvals typically flow. And I think the things that have occurred in Arkansas are pretty highly publicized, and so that has kind of changed the game, so to speak, of how things are happening there. And we certainly want to see people follow the label and manage the technology appropriately, so we don't see other states choosing to take a different approach.
Okay, thank you, Lance. Can you comment on how much do these label listed buffer zones, nozzle types, and other requirements differ from Clarity's labels?
Yeah, so some of the things that will be different from a Clarity label. Clarity at this time, has the allowance for tank mixtures with a number of products, and so that restriction is not on the Clarity label. There's not a restriction on specific nozzles. What you'll find on the clarity label are more general language around using spray tips that produce droplets that don't drift, whereas the XtendiMax label gives you a specific droplet at a specific pressure range. And then again, with the buffer language, that's something that only exists on the XtendiMax label and Ingenia label, but doesn't exist on the clarity label. So there are differences. Just as a note too, that clarity is not labeled for use in season with Xtend soybeans. Only XtendiMax and Ingenia are labeled for use in season. The only use of clarity that could be in use with the Xtend soybean would be in that more traditional burn down market that you would use clarity for today in front of soybeans, with the knowledge that there's a plant back restriction based off your rate that you use anywhere from 14 to 28 days after an inch of rainfall. So clarity as a burn down, if you were to use it in the Xtend system, would have to follow those plant back restrictions.
Okay. You might extend a few more minutes, gentlemen. I'd like to get through some of these questions. You talked about, using corn as a great buffer because corn is tolerant of dicamba, but somebody asked a question, do we need to worry about brace root fusing or brittleness in corn with an XtendiMax application next door?
Yeah, that's a good question, and generally speaking, no. The reason for that is we're not making a direct application of the herbicide onto the corn crop. We're talking, when you talk about the concentration of herbicide that moves in the driftable fines, you're talking about a very low concentration that doesn't have an effect on the corn plant. So concern with brace root fusion or other symptoms that may arise from a dicamba application are lessened because we're talking such low rates.
I would add to that, Chris, if you hang the boom 3 rows into the corn to make sure you get all the weeds, yeah, you will have some fused brace roots on those edge rows. I mean, a direct application of a half a pound of dicamba, I would expect to see some crop response in that corn. It's not going to kill that crop, but I would expect to see some crop response if you did make a direct application.
Okay. I think a lot of people still probably have this whole drift buffer zone thing. What is the difference between the downwind buffer and not applying when the wind is growing, when wind is moving towards sensitive crops? I thought the buffer was so you could still apply near sensitive crops. That's exactly my question. I had that question too. Did you understand that?
Yeah. So the downwind buffer applies to adjacent sensitive areas. And sensitive areas would be areas that could potentially harbor threatened or endangered species. The do not spray if there's susceptible crops downwind, that applies to actual crops. So the difference is in areas versus crops.
That's where the confusion occurs, Dan. It's a sensitive area and a susceptible crop are two different things. But in the minds of a lot of growers, it's one and the same thing. And, and when it took us a while to work through this as well, and some of us even interpreted that incorrectly at first, making the same assumptions that most logical people would make, is that a soybean field is a sensitive area. A soybean field is not a sensitive area. A soybean field is a susceptible crop if it's not an Xtend soybean field. So when you and that sounds a little convoluted, but if you think through it step by step, it does make sense the way the label reads once you understand that a sensitive area is not the same as a susceptible crop.
I think this might help clarify, at least for me. So if you have a dicamba tolerance, a dicamba vulnerable soybean across the road, and your field, you're going to put on 44 fluid ounces, and you need that 220-foot buffer, that buffer might include some rows of Xtend beans, correct? It would include the dips, the road, the ditch, and some rows of the Xtend bean. You have to have that 220-foot setback from that field edge of those vulnerable soybeans to where your sprayer boom stops. Is that correct? Do I understand that correctly?
Lance, you want to take it, or you want me to kind of?
Well, I'll dive in there, and you can bail me out, Chris, if you need to. I mean, I would say, Dan, that's probably not correct.
That's not correct.
And here's why. The soybean field would be a susceptible crop. If the wind is blowing towards that susceptible crop, then we don't spray. The label doesn't say you can spray with a buffer towards a susceptible crop. The label says wind's blowing towards a susceptible crop, you don't spray. So you don't need that. You don't need that buffer because you're not going to make that application.
Okay.
Yes.
Chris, would you state that any differently?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. Yep.
So if the wind isn't blowing, how does that 220 foot apply?
So if the wind is not blowing towards
it's less than 10 miles an hour.
Yeah, if it's not blowing towards the sensitive area at all, so it's blowing in a completely different direction, then no buffer would be necessary. It's only necessary if the wind is blowing towards that sensitive area. And then the restriction on not spraying on sensitive or susceptible crops only applies if the wind is blowing towards the susceptible crops.
So what is
the scenario, Dan, in the scenario you described, where you've got an adjacent soybean field that you're worried about, there is no requirement for a buffer.
Okay.
Period. Because if the wind's blowing towards that field, you're not to apply.
Okay, got that.
And the label doesn't say you can apply if you've got a buffer. The label says not to apply. So the confusion around, and this is, I mean, I'm glad we're having this conversation because this is something that trips a lot of people up. It tripped me up until I, got through it and got comfortable with it. The buffer language that's in these labels, not just the XtendiMax label, but other product labels, any product that's come out in the last 2 or 3 years has the same language or very similar language in it around a sensitive area buffer. And that sensitive area is relative to endangered species. And so the buffer is to protect endangered species. The buffer has nothing to do with protecting your neighbor's soybeans from a label standpoint. Your neighbor's non-Xtend soybeans are a susceptible crop, not a sensitive area that might harbor endangered species. So the buffer that everybody talks about, the buffer is specific to endangered species and areas that might harbor endangered species. So it is a lot different than the way a lot of people assume, because the area that's most likely to need the buffer to be by label is an area that you might not be concerned about. It might be a CRP field. It might be a natural area. Road right-of-ways and places that get mowed, those don't qualify. But it is very different than the way I think of where a lot of people's heads are, because everybody thinks the buffer has something to do with an adjacent field of soybeans, and it really doesn't.
Okay, so that's a very, very good point. Thank you, Lance. Question here on these tank mixes, and there's been a couple questions on these tank mixes here. The question is, will there be some listed by post-application time?
It is hard to say. We would hope so, but we can't make any guarantees. and we haven't been given any definitive timelines. And so all we can tell you is that we are testing them, we are evaluating these tank mixes, and as soon as they are available, we'll let you know. But we can't say with any certainty that when that time will be.
So at this time, XtendiMax has to be applied as a sole herbicide with no other additional adjuvants in water, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What chemical group?
We've developed recommendations and best practices to accommodate that, Dan, with hopes that we've got more flexibility before application season. But we are prepared to utilize the technology with that restriction if it's still in place.
Okay. What about what chemical groups would you recommend to control escapes to XtendiMax? I mean, and that might be due to applied it when it's too late, right? When they're too tall or something. What chemical groups would you recommend to utilize to control escapes?
That can vary. A lot of it would vary on the weed species, but if we're talking water hemp as an example, which is most likely to happen, what we'd have to be familiar with is how susceptible or what type of resistance may be in that water hemp. We probably can assume it's ALS resistant, possibly glyphosate, and maybe even PPO resistant. So those are options, particularly glyphosate and PPO herbicides. But if we know that there's resistance in that field to those, then we shouldn't expect to get effectiveness out of it. So we're really looking at physically removing those plants from the field if they don't, if they aren't controlled by a dicamba application. The other thing with that type of scenario, just thinking about it, we're probably going to be at weeds that have some size to them, and whether they're susceptible or not to a PPO or glyphosate product are going to be very difficult to control. So, that's where the diligence in scouting this, in a timely manner is going to pay dividends in terms of being able to implement a control tactic.
Okay. If the wind is 15 miles an hour, how far will it drift? If it's 15 miles an hour, you can't spray, but it's just a question here. How far will it drift?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variables that would be involved in that calculation. Would be, the size of the spray tip, the boom height, and things like that. Yeah. So it's really hard to say how far it would drift in a 50-mile-an-hour wind. What we can say is that we know that when we do follow the application requirements with the right spray tip, right pressure, right boom height, right speed, and right volume, that the drift potential is minimum.
Okay. Okay, I think we've covered the questions here. Chris and Lance, thank you very much for a great presentation. You covered a lot of territory today and really addressed a lot of the questions, like I said, that were being asked. We're just a little bit over time, about 10 minutes. I want to thank all the participants for coming on and listening to the webinar today. Again, if you signed in as a CCA and you submitted your CCA number and you stayed for the webinar, for the kind of duration of the webinar, your CCA number will be submitted for 1 credit. If you are listening to this webinar as a recording, just a reminder to go online to your CCA account, and you can self-apply for credit for this webinar. I want to thank Chris and Lance for participating, and thank Monsanto for sponsoring this webinar. And again, I want to thank everyone for coming online and attending today. Again, thank you very much, and on behalf of Illinois Soybeans Association, thank you for participating, and this webinar is now ending.